to have to chuckle when they describe you and me as being dangerous. That's one thing, they are telling the truth, because we are dangerous to the status quo of this country.
Ron Paul is here. He retired from Congress in January after serving 12 terms as a representative from Texas. He dedicated his long political career to advocating libertarian principles, individual liberty, economic freedom, and non-interventionist foreign policy. He ran for president on that platform 3 times. He has been called the intellectual godfather of the Tea Party movement. In his new book, he writes about America's education system and proposes changes to fix it. It is called The School Revolution, a new answer for our broken education system. I am pleased to have him here at this table for the first time. Welcome.
Thank you. Nice to be here.
It's about time you came here. No. So let me, before we talk about the book and education, and the book's called The School Revolution, a new answer for our broken education system, as I said, define what libertarianism means to you.
You know, to me, the word I use to best define it is something not a lot of people use. I call it non-intervention. Yeah. And
non-intervention in personal life, non-intervention in foreign policy, non-intervention in...
There it is. And because it sort of tells you what conservatives and libertarians and constitutionalists and classical liberalism has been used closely as a line, you know, with libertarianism. But non-intervention, as you say, I don't want to interfere in your personal life. The one rule is you can't hurt another person. You know, that's when government's necessary.
Your freedom ends at the beginning of not punching nose.
And the founders were pretty adamant about advice about not getting involved in entangling alliances or interfering in the internal affairs of other nations. So that's non-intervention. And then also in the economy, sometimes I get close allies with the left. An honest progressive Democrat like a Dennis Kucinich we were always work together on civil liberties and foreign policy. But then when it came to economic policy, I apply the same rule of non-intervention to economics. Now, they say, well, you mean that means business people can do anything they want? No, there's still some very basic rules.
That's why I'm asking the question. I mean, what kind of regulation are you prepared to think is necessary in a capitalist system?
Mostly they're not government regulations. They're not preemption. I look at this like if you're in the media business, the one thing you don't want is prior restraint, you know, because the government is going to tell you what you can say and what you can't say. Well, I apply that to economics. You produce a product and there's no prior restraint. You say, well, how do you get this protection? The market, the free market is pretty strict on regulation.
So you wouldn't want to see a FDA?
No, they do
as much. You have to get their approval before you can market a drug.
Yeah, and the FDA is run by individuals who used to be in the drug. They're connected with the.
Well, but you can't just dismiss it that way. I mean, there's an idea here, brother, that they are corrupt people because of whatever.
Most of the time, when you have regulations, say you regulate banking, the banking lobby writes those. If it's FDA,
but stay with it. Okay, but let's assume what you're saying
is true. Well, that's good. That's one good reason not to do it.
Okay, the pharmaceutical company controls the FDA.
Right.
Is that your point?
Yeah.
And so, therefore, whatever they do is what?
Well, sometimes they prevent good drugs from coming out, and sometimes they endorse bad drugs.
But isn't that they keep bad drugs from coming out? Is that a useful purpose?
Yes, but...
And that's prior restraint, then?
Yes, but you're making the assumption that in the market there would be nobody to supervise. There would be supervisory organizations that would
voluntary organizations.
Yeah, I mean, you have a good housekeeping seal of approval that people use all the time.
You believe that would work with respect to drugs when you know?
I think it will not be perfect, but what we have today is so imperfect because the assumption is made that most business people don't want to take good care of their customers. And I think that's wrong. I think most business people...
Yeah, but the question is not what most want to do. The question is how do you make sure those who don't want to take care of their customers, who want to do otherwise, that there is some barrier from them doing it?
Yeah, if you want perfect safety in any area, in social matters...
Not perfect, but it minimize the kind of things that, whether it's, you know...
Yeah, I think every regulation creates the necessity of having 2 new regulations, and that's why the Federal Register grows all the time. They don't solve the problems. They are unintended consequences. There's expenses involved. But the assumption is...
all bad regulation. I mean, you know, as long as there are regulations that don't serve the purpose, you should have no regulations.
I want regulations by the marketplace, because there are some. You can't commit fraud, you can't steal, you can't hurt people, you can't do a lot. And there should be immediate reaction. It's not like you can do anything you want. And the basic assumption is that business people want to satisfy their customers. But when you have regulations, it becomes politicized. It's totally political. It's sort of like distributing R&D funds. Oh, well, everybody wants research and development, but if it's political, you put the money into the wrong things.
Then are you saying regulations are a bad thing because they don't work, because they become politicized, or...
Those are pretty good reasons.
Okay, but is that the reason?
Mine is a moral reason that a moral reason that I don't. The same reason I don't have the moral reason to come here and use prior restraint, because you might libel somebody, or you might say something that will harm a lot of people. Just think of the damage. The damage done by bad philosophy, philosophy and religion. Look at all the things that are done. But we wouldn't think for a minute. More people have been killed by bad religious theology, distorted theology, I think it is, as long as in philosophy. Yeah. I mean, the philosophy of totalitarianism has been around for a long time, but we don't burn the books and prevent you from studying it, because, and look at much more harm was done by freedom of choice with our minds and in religion. Those kind of problems are so much greater than if you say that there's a self-regulatory aspect of what free people will do. We gave up too soon on the principles of liberty, and I think that's really what I'm interested in. Did
the Federal Reserve serve us well then at the time of the economic collapse?
No, I think they prolong the agony, and it just means that there's going to be more suffering later on. We're into our 5th year now, and we're embarking on what we did in the 30s. The Depression lasted 15 years. The correction wasn't permitted. The Japanese economy hasn't revived because they kept doing the wrong things. You have to allow a correction of all the mistakes, and we have not allowed that to happen.
In other words, what would you have preferred to have been the response to the economic collapse?
Do a lot less. Not created as the best. Prevention.
So what if all the banks had gone under and all that? That would have been okay because the market worked?
Because it's the best thing to do is not reward the people who made so much money. The people who were in the derivatives market and the market, they were rewarded at the penalty of the middle class. They got the taxes. They lost their jobs. They lost their mortgages. They lost their houses. And
would more, if they hadn't stepped in and said this is a temporary matter, but we have to step because the economic system, like it did in the Great Depression, is about to collapse?
Yeah. But what they did was what they did in the Depression and made it worse. So that is the real problem.
Closing the banks made it worse?
Bailing them out and propping up a system that caused a problem. But if you're looking for a good example of what you could do to limit it, see, the Fed came in 13, they inflated massively, for World War I, and then there had to be a correction because there was overinvestment and distortion. So in 1921, there was a depression. It lasted 1 year, and none of us even study it in school because hands off. The people have overextended, and they weren't solvent. They went out of business, and it was over. But in the 30s, the Keynesians came in and said, you can't do this out of humanitarian concerns. We have to care for people. So they said, spend more money, borrow more money, print more money, and the Depression ended not until after World War II.
So stimulating the economy on the part of the Federal Reserve or any other policy is not a good idea at a time of economic
It's never
severity.
A good idea because they stimulate the stimulation. You don't know where it's going to go. In the 90s, we stimulated all the money going in. It went into the NASDAQ and created a bubble. In the early part of this century, the money went into housing. So you can't control it. You can say, well, money out there will help stimulate, but you never know. But it stimulates one thing for the middle class, and those are prices. Yeah. So some people make a lot of money. It's to the benefit of governments and the bureaucrats and big business, the military-industrial complex, but it's not good for the middle class because their cost of living their cost of living goes up much faster than their wages. And just look at it today. I mean, we have two societies, and that's explainable by Austrian economics. It's not explainable by saying, well, the 1%, the rich people, if you're in the top 10%, we need to tax you more.
So under a President Ron Paul, we would not have had an idea you once had. Did you seriously think you could be president?
Yeah, I could be, but I
really
wasn't sitting there anticipating that would likely
But it was a worthwhile
happen.
endeavor because you could have
I used to kid that I'm taking a risk, you know. It could have happened.
You could have
but when I ran first time for Congress, I had no thought ever of ever winning an election because I spoke the same way.
Yeah.
And I kept telling my wife, don't worry, I'm not going to be elected because they won't elect somebody who's attacking Santa Claus.
Yeah.
You know, you're challenging. When you challenge the entire status quo, it's not like you say, all right, you know, I can convert you all in 10 minutes. So this is why I never got frustrated in Washington because, you know, in Washington, I didn't expect to change it. So what happened outside of Washington, I have been amazingly surprised.
So looking at the world today, when should the United States use force overseas?
If somebody uses force against us and overseas, is it virtually never? I mean, we don't.
So it's none of business of ours if the Syrians use chemical weapons.
Well, no,
not
not directly.
That kind of response that the president was considering.
We should deal with the things that are our responsibility because in the last couple of years we've killed 5,000 people with drone missiles.
Right. And what do you think of that?
I think it's horrible. We have something to say about that. Those are our elected leaders. We shouldn't pretend that we know when to intervene in Syria. Here we are today. Our president's working very hard to make sure that a lot of people in this country don't have guns. Right. At the same time, we're giving guns to the Al-Qaeda who's fighting Assad, and they're involved in this, and we're benefiting.
And how are we giving guns to Al-Qaeda?
Well, we're helping. We're sending weapons into the rebels.
Yeah, but I mean, you know better. You know that they're not trying to send weapons to Al-Qaeda. They're trying to send them to the moderate
They've even
Syrians
said that if it's necessary.
Because they believe that if, in fact, Assad, they can overthrow Assad, that it weakens Iran, and they certainly want to weaken Iran.
Others have suggested they know exactly what they're doing. And if you're supporting the military overthrow and supporting any rebel group, you support them all. I mean, didn't we do something very similar with bin Laden in Afghanistan when he was the Mujahideen?
Let's assume that there is convincing evidence that the Iranians not only have the capacity but have nuclear weapons. Now, that's been a red line. Every American president has said that's unacceptable. What does Ron Paul say?
I would treat them sort of like we did with the Soviets. They had 30,000, right, and we talked to them.
So containment's okay with you?
Well, I certainly wouldn't go to war. Do you think the Iranians are going to attack us? They don't have any. Here we look at the discussion we've had for 10 years or more.
Would you want to risk that?
On a weapon that doesn't exist. Right. I mean, right now, Obama, if anything, we're getting hints. I think they're delightful that they're willing to talk to this new leader over there. Yeah. I think this is wonderful that he'll at least talk. That's what's my argument.
So when the president talks about engagement, you're saying right on, brother.
If you want to talk to him, fine and dandy. I think that we should do a lot more talking. You know how many thousands of diplomats we have. It's time we had a little bit of diplomacy.
What does the Tea Party represent today?
I think it represents a group of people that aren't uniform in all their beliefs, except for they're disgusted with big government, the operation of government, the efficiency of government, and especially the spending in government. But actually, the very first time this started up was during our campaign, but then it branched out and Republicans got very much involved.
And if it's tied to shutting down the government, is that okay with Ron Paul?
Well, yes, because the alternative is turning the United States into Detroit. You know, you just can't keep spending money in trillions of dollars and borrowing and printing money. So the calamity is going to be much worse than slowing up the spending.
That's why I like having you here. The school revolution, a new answer for our broken education system. What's broken? And lots of people believe lots is broken. And how would you fix it?
Well, that is, the people agree that it's broken. We've had a system for 150 years based on compulsion and conformity, and I don't think that's good. It's a dictatorial, it's an authoritarian system. It has abolished creativity and curiosity, which is very necessary. So the whole theme of the book is based around the philosophy we were just talking about, and it's the philosophy of liberty, which is non-coercive. And our public school system teaches the authoritarian approach, why you have to have government run the economy, why you have to protect the government against bad social habits, and why you have to police the world. So it's a philosophy that it contradicts everything in the freedom philosophy. So the book is based on what is liberty, how to define it, how to defend it, for the sole purpose of getting a better education. And the design for an education for this being grade school and high school is how you get into college, how you start a business. But it's really designed in such a way where the student and the parents become totally in charge and not the Washington scene. You know, Washington now is writing, you know, it's Republicans and Democrats. The Republicans gave us No Child Left Behind, and, you know, nobody likes that anymore. And now we're having core curriculum. It's more and more testing and controls, and the kids are bored to death. Kids want to learn. Before they get into school, that's all they do is they ask questions and they learn. And school, the public school system just sort of squelches all that curiosity.
I know. With respect to public schools, though, homeschooling, you believe that is the way to go in terms of parents who believe that that the public school education is not benefiting their kids?
I think it's an option. That doesn't solve all the problems because I don't think 100% of the people should homeschool.
Okay.
You know, the goal is to look at people who are self-starters and self-disciplined, to create leadership, people who are interested in another school of thought on economics and willing to listen to the non-interventionist policies that I talk about. So it's probably 20% maximum that would be, likely to take this course. And also, it's designed to protect liberty, which means it protects everybody's homeschooling program. Mine is non-religious. It's sort of a secular approach to liberty so that the individuals are always protected. You know, then we get away from all these arguments. Can you say in prayer at school and what books? How are you going to pick the right book in a public school? You know, because we can find all kinds of examples of a very great bias in our public schools, but I don't want to get in there and be in charge of rewriting the textbooks because you can't satisfy everybody. But if you have people going to private schools and homeschooling, really, that is diversity. That's the kind of diversity.
How about charter schools? What do you think of them?
Charter school probably gives some people some benefit, but once again, it's, you know, a government. I think it's the best thing. It serves the purpose, but they do better, you know, than the regular, you know, public school system.
And sometimes they do, sometimes they don't.
Yeah, so I don't. That isn't the answer. I'm not promoting it.
Are you optimistic about America because of, what is it, the essence of our creed? I mean by that the Constitution and the Bill of Rights.
You know, when I go to the college campuses, which I continue to do, and I like that, and I talk, you know, about all our problems about 90% of the time. Then I talk about liberty and why I'm optimistic, why the market works, and why your business and your life is your own, and why it would be so much better for the world if we didn't have a policy of war. So I become very optimistic, and I'm optimistic because of the reception I get, because libertarian freedom is on the move, and for two reasons. One, it's been developed over the last 30 years. Also, the failure of the system. This Keynesian economics and welfareism and socialism and inflationism, it's failing. Our foreign policy is failing, and people want something different. So the doors are open for an idea, and I think the ideas of liberty are just a wonderful thing, so I'm an optimist about that.
Any doubt in your mind that the senator from Kentucky, Rand Paul, your son, will run for president?
Well,
in
I think it's a little early. When they started that last year, you know, in the fall, they started about the next election. I said, I'm still trying to count my votes from the last election. Wait a minute. So, I mean, he's acting like he's very interested.
I don't know, he is. He's acting like he's running. He acts like he's running.
Yeah, I wouldn't argue with that, but you know, people don't believe this, but he and I don't have a whole lot of conversations like that about what are you going to do today.
But do you have a whole lot in common?
We have a lot in common.
Do you?
I think so.
Like 99% of what he says, you agree with 99% of what you say.
Yeah.
Well, what do you differ over?
I think probably approach. He's a little more nuanced, I guess, or say.
Oh, he's more nuanced.
So, but he's leading the charge. I don't think he's going to come out and say that the Fed is the greatest outfit we ever had, and we don't need to audit them. That's not going to happen.
Then if he does that, he can't.
And he's been very good on NSA, and I like that.
Oh yeah,
you know, and right and left. My main goal.
Tell me what you like about NSA. That's a good point.
Nothing.
Exactly.
Nothing. I don't like it. But what I like about the debate and debate. What I'm talking about in school and what I did in Congress is bring a new coalition together. And we saw it with NSA, and we saw it with the vote that didn't occur on the war. And that's bringing progressive Democrats together with libertarians. I think that's the new move, and I think
progressive Democrats and libertarians is a new majority?
I think they can become. I mean, they didn't win the vote on NSA, but they only lost by 12 against Pelosi and Boehner. See, the established parties, Republican and Democrat Party, endorse the same views. Most people think they're really at loggerheads over philosophy, but they're not.
Where they come together with the Tea Party is mainly from the left side is civil liberties, isn't it?
Yeah, civil liberties.
Civil liberties having to do with freedom of expression, having to do with
foreign policy too. Yeah. So those two issues, those are big issues right now. You know. So matter of fact, the position I took into campaign on the economic issues, because we're broke and it's going to lead to bad things. I say, why don't we agree to bring troops home and save our money? And I said, even though I'm opposed to some of these social programs, child health care and these things, I said, but so many people are dependent on it. I will not start there and start cutting those programs. Sometimes Republicans get trapped into saying, we're going to cut some welfare programs, and they want billions and billions more to police the welfare. So I don't take that approach. And that's the reason I don't seem to be so hostile to even working with people who have a disagreement with me, and they might want total government medicine, which obviously I don't. But you could work a transition. I don't expect it. I would work by changing the foreign policy and having a foreign policy that defended this country, saving a lot of money, and trying to wean people off these programs. But I'm afraid the programs are going to self-destruct with a currency crisis. If we keep borrowing, foreigners are still loaning us money, and we keep printing it. But the market will decide when enough is enough. And then they'll just say interest rates are going up, and the interest payments will be the biggest item in the budget.
The book is called The School Revolution, A New Answer for Our Broken Educational System. Ron Paul, thank you for joining us. See you next time.